Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm Kevin Nikkhoo, CEO of Zenex SOC. Today, we're diving into a topic that has become one of the most critical challenges facing schools across the country: cybersecurity and data privacy in K-12 environments. Schools are no longer just centers for education, they're highly connected digital environments. Managing sensitive student and faculty data, cloud systems, devices, and applications. And unfortunately, that makes them a growing target for cyber attacks. Joining me today is Darryl Loy, principal and founder at the Modern Learning Collaborative, who brings deep experience working with schools and understanding the unique challenges they face. Darryl, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it.
So, Darryl, before we get started, would you please talk about your background? And we want our audience to get to know you a little bit better. Let's start with that.
Sure, absolutely. Well, education is kind of a second career for me. I spent probably 15, 16 years in corporate finance, corporate accounting and finance, and a couple of fairly large corporations. And I bring that up because obviously accounting data highly secure and something that businesses absolutely want to protect. But I moved out of corporate accounting into education, and I've spent about the last 23 years in education. Moved in as director of operations. At my first school, I had accounting and finance responsibilities as well as IT. And that was 2003, when I'd say a lot of the cyber issues were just beginning to heat up in the corporate world and not so much in education. So I've functioned in that director of technology role for the last 23 years, and spent a lot of time talking about and thinking about cybersecurity. And that was enhanced a bit when I had the opportunity to attend an FBI Citizens Academy. So I got an opportunity to go spend some time with FBI Dallas in particular, learning about the FBI from the inside out. And as you know, cyber is a huge area for the FBI as well. So I've learned even more from them and been able to bring that into the work that I do in schools.
Oh, that's really cool. So we can get a lot of insight from your experience and what you've done with schools and this podcast. And I'm really happy for that, excited to hear a lot more. So let's just get into it. So the first topic that I want to talk about is the threat landscape. And we hear a lot about cyber attacks in the news, but from your perspective, why are K through 12 schools are such frequent targets today versus in the past?
Yeah, well, as you know, as everyone knows, more and more data is moved into digital forms. When I began in education, we still had a lot of paper records, big, large filing cabinets in the back and a lot of paper records. But as computers have moved into the workflow, all that data is out there in a digital form. And schools are just a huge repository of attractive data to attackers. I mean, there's student records, obviously. We've got financial information for parents, payment records. We've got health records, staff, payroll data. There's just a wide range of attractive data for hackers that schools are involved in these days.
Well, that's interesting. Are you seeing certain types of attack like ransomware, phishing becoming more dominant?
I certainly am definitely seeing both of those, ransomware to a lesser degree, but phishing attempts and phishing attacks are really the forefront to almost all of that. And absolutely, I have seen a huge increase in that. if you want to talk about a couple of specific cases that sort of got me into a little more heightened awareness, we had a rash at a school I was at a number of years ago of phishing attacks, and it cost some of our faculty and our school some fairly significant amounts of money, and that's when I realized that it was time to kick up the education process in a big way. That's when I developed a presentation that I began to do every summer for all of our faculty and staff, and to teach them how to become a hard target, because I've learned that it's oftentimes easier for hackers to hack people than it is to hack systems. So that's why I think we've seen such an increase in the phishing attack.
Actually, we're seeing something, as a SOC as a service, we're seeing something similar, especially attacks that move across multiple of systems. It's no longer just one entry point, and that's how attackers navigate the entire environment. Absolutely, we're seeing the same thing. So let's talk about data privacy and compliance. Uh, Students and faculty data. What are the biggest uh, privacy issues and data that we have to protect? What are the concerns that schools should be thinking about right now?
Sure. Health records are a huge thing, and we are seeing more and more of those kinds of records being digitized so that we can share that out with broader audiences. And when you talk about health records, we're talking even more than some of the more traditional data-related security practices. We've got HIPAA and things like that we have to worry about. So yeah, it's a wealth of information, as I said earlier. All the student demographic data, all of that stuff, we are on high alert to make sure that we keep that stuff secure. Lots of government information and regulation around that space as well. It gets kind of overwhelming to navigate sometimes.
Specifically, regulation like FERPA?
Exactly. Yes. Now, a lot of my background is in private schools, and so a lot of those government regulations like that don't necessarily apply, because typically in private schools they don't take a lot of government related funding, and that's when those kinds of requirements are stipulated. That doesn't mean we take them any less seriously, though. In the private school environment, that's absolutely critical to the data that we manage and the data that we work to protect.
Yeah, we've seen that many school districts are compliant on paper, but still lack visibility into what's actually happening in real time.
And
Uh,
that's the bottom line. It's we know, we can read, and we know all of the compliance efforts that are required. But actually, is it happening in the real world? Yeah, that's the question.
and that's the gap between what compliance requires and the true protection. Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly.
Hmm.
So technology complexity. I want to talk about that a little bit. Schools today running a mix of systems. You mentioned some of them, right? But there's also cloud platforms, student devices, BYOD, email systems, and of course a lot more. Uh, how has this complexity impacted cybersecurity?
Well, it just it's like building a house and adding just more and more doors, more and more ways into the data that we're trying to protect. And I've worked hard in a lot of the school environments I've been in to sort of reduce that level of complexity. A lot of schools today still run major data centers. They've got big power issues to deal with, and I've worked really hard to get a lot of the schools I've been a part of out of that server business, in an effort to sort of reduce to close one of those doors, if you will, into the data. And by pushing a lot of that stuff to the cloud, it helps. Google. I tell everyone Google has a great deal a bigger budget for security than I would ever have at any of my schools. So I try to lean on some of that to a certain degree. It doesn't necessarily shut every door, but there are there are ways into cloud environment stuff as well. It just changes sort of where our focus is. But yeah, every one of those endpoints, every one of those servers that are out there, they're just other doors into the data that we're trying to protect.
Do you see schools struggling with having too many tools that don't necessarily work together?
That's huge. Yeah. Again, in that server environment where schools are still running data centers, you've got certain servers that may be on certain platforms. Then we start talking about the actual education technology layer that we put on schools. Those are other disparate systems, if you will, that are integrated into the workflow. So, and that's just another area of exposure. So yeah, there's just there can be a lot of different systems in each school environment, and it does make a difference, especially if they don't talk together very well.
Yeah, that's something we hear often, tool sprawl. Without a unified view, without the enterprise view or school view, school-wide view visibility, it's difficult to connect the dots.
It is, yeah. And, oftentimes I've got 5 or 6, 7 dashboards at any one time on my
Yeah.
screen, trying to keep a handle on all that. Yeah, absolutely.
So we know that most schools have a lot of Chromebooks, devices, the endpoints. This is something that I want to talk about a little bit because it's very important in terms of how we support schools, especially Chromebooks and student devices. So let's talk about the risk. What risk do these devices introduce to the environment? And
Sure.
how should schools think about securing them?
Well, yeah, as I indicated earlier, that each endpoint is just another door into the data that we're trying to protect. And you put a device in the hands of a very curious teenager. They're going to try everything they can do to open that device up, and access everything that they can. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with groups of students who have managed to get their way around the security aspects that I've put in place, so they can't play games and do a lot of that kind of information, or that kind of thing while in class. I'll put things in place to prevent that, and invariably students find their way around it. And I've always had the conversation, look, these are great skills that you're developing here, but I need you to use these skills for good. And so,
Yeah.
they're your future employees. The guys that are the kids that are understanding how a lot of that stuff works. But yeah, that is absolutely should be high on everyone's list. And Chromebooks are more prolific these days, I think, across schools, and that because they're a relatively closed environment, I think that helps a little bit. But we again can't be complacent and just assume that everything that we've built in using the Google Management Console, all those kinds of things is enough. It's not as bad. You mentioned BYOD environments; those can be a challenge. Excuse me. You mentioned BYOD environments; those can be a huge challenge because you never really know what students are bringing into your network. So, and that those are more disparate tools that have to be employed to manage that stuff. So those are the kinds of things that schools need to think about. If you're not a BYOD environment, or you're looking to move away from that, look at what sort of platforms and other sort of tools you might need to best protect those endpoints.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned that you talked to that group of students, and it reminded me of a school district CTO, a customer of ours that I spoke to, and he said the students are actually smarter than our faculty. And no matter what we give them, they find a way to work around it, and some of them know how to use the technology better than anybody else could. So you're absolutely correct. This is exactly what we've heard from several schools, and that brings the question: that is it more about the device level protection or understanding how those devices interact with the broader network? In other words, when you have these devices in the environment, whether it's a Chromebook or something else, the impact of that particular device in the overall system, and how a hacker could penetrate the environment, getting in from one point and then moving across the network.
Right.
What
Yeah.
is it, the device? Would you say that it's a device level protection that we're going to be looking at, or is it understanding how those devices interact with everything else in the network?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. As an IT professional, certainly we need to understand how those devices interact with everything else on the network. Then we need to understand the end user. Who is it, and what access do they need? What sort of permissions should they have? Because if you've got let's say, for example, a fourth grade student who is using a Chromebook, and their credentials only give them very limited access to certain things, maybe not even Google Drive, you have to, you can afford to worry a little bit less about their impact across the broader network. Where you really want to take some time and analyze that is your faculty and your staff, because often they have greater privileges across network resources. So when they get phished, then we've got a broader exposure. And I've run into that as well, particularly back during COVID when everything moved remote. Had some staff members that fell victim to a phishing attack, and what that particular administrator's credentials provided that hacker was far more serious than had they simply hacked a student.
Yeah, 100%. In fact, had an experience with a large organization that, because they got hacked and they got access to the systems, they got a ransomware attack and they were shut down, and they had to go to ledgers and manually write checks and input everything for 6 months, and
My
it was
goodness.
very difficult. So yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. I want to change the conversation a little bit and talk about AI. Of course, there is no podcast that could not cover AI and emerging risks associated with AI. So AI is becoming, or I should say has already become, a major topic in cybersecurity. Deep fakes are already there. The kind of messaging that goes on both with voice and email, and and deep fake actually connects the two. The ability to take the voice from a superintendent and send a message to pay something, and says, I follow this up with an email. You'll see it in my signature, but do it right away. And the two tie to each other because it goes from the right email address, because they've already been compromised. So it's a huge problem. So with that introduction, how are you seeing AI change the threat landscape for schools?
Yeah, yes, it's huge, and it is shifting, because we were experiencing successful phishing attacks when it's just text on the page, and I spent, as I said, a lot of time developing training for my faculty and staff to become more situationally aware, that the text on the page that they're looking at isn't legitimate. It didn't come from the principal. It didn't come from the superintendent. It didn't come from the head of school. And here's how you can tell that. Well, AI and their ability to do those deep fakes make that so much more difficult. If folks are struggling with the text on the page, the deep fake stuff is just going to take that up several notches at this point. And so, yeah, we've really got to increase the kind of education that we're doing, and then also rely on a lot of the tools that are out there to help us monitor that.
Yeah, we also are seeing a pretty big uptake on AI attacks, and of course, as the defenders being SOC as a service, we also have our AI that actually combats that, and we try to protect our schools accordingly. It's really a challenge, and a big challenge, and I think it's going to get even more complicated and sophisticated attacks, and that's why tools that are AI based are very critical in in identifying and also remediating and helping to do incident management right away before it becomes a problem for schools. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense that you would use AI to fight AI. That absolutely makes sense to me, because as more and more of these large data sets are developed and are and the algorithms fight to collect all that information, they just get smarter and smarter and smarter. So, yeah, it makes sense to use tools like that for AI to fight AI. Absolutely.
So when we talk about resources and operations, one of the biggest challenges we hear from every school, the large districts, small districts, private schools, is limited IT staff. It's a known fact that all schools have limited IT staff and they're overworked. They're burdened with a lot of things, and there's not enough hours to attend everything, particularly as it relates to cybersecurity, because it's a more sophisticated issue, and schools don't necessarily have the subject matter experts and the tools necessary to deal with cybersecurity. So, how can schools realistically manage cybersecurity with constrained resources? What do you see? What are your recommendations as how schools should address this?
Yeah. Well, Kevin, there's two things that are always short and lacking in schools. Well, number one is storage space, just physical storage space. There's never enough closet space to store everything that schools have to store throughout the school year and from year to year. But the other is people resources. There's just never enough of that to go around. Everyone, particularly in small schools, they wear lots of hats. That's the way we all like to put it. And in my director of technology roles, absolutely wore lots of hats. Had to focus on the security, the network infrastructure layer that we've been talking about, and the security related to that. Got to wear a hat for the education technology piece, the piece that deals with the technology that's being used in the classroom, be that smart panels, interactive panels, screen sharing devices, Apple TVs to other screen sharing devices that are connected. Yeah, the adults in schools have to wear lots of hats often, and invariably something's going to get dropped. So, a big push that I've made with schools I work with recently, I mentioned trying to get everyone out of that server business, is also trying to help folks get get out of some of that network infrastructure business as well, because in addition to the monitoring and management pieces that you guys bring to the table, there are folks out there doing network infrastructure as a service. And my big push, particularly with the Modern Learning Collaborative, is to help schools understand that the adults on campus should be focused on the learning. That's the whole premise behind the Modern Learning Collaborative. We're here to help faculty, staff, administrators understand how to focus on the learning, and let these other pieces go to those folks that have the knowledge and are the subject matter experts in these areas. And that's the way, one of the biggest ways to combat the issue of resources that are just limited.
So, in your opinion, what should be handled internally versus externally when it comes to cybersecurity?
I think again, I don't enjoy being in a position where as I said earlier, I've got 5 dashboards on my computer screens here to help me manage that. I, as a director of technology, by default, am not the subject matter expert in the cybersecurity space. I have to rely on tools like yours, the things that you guys have developed to really help with that management. So I can focus on the things that are important to the institution broadly, and that is the learning. It's the kids. That's why we're all at school. We're there for the kids and for their education, for their learning, and help them become, as I like to say, prepare them for the realities of and success in the modern world. Sitting there and watching cyber attack screens and making sure that we're 100% protected takes away from that.
Yeah, that's exactly what we've heard. We've seen many schools benefit from extending their team with a security operations center like ours, the model, so that they're not carrying the full burden internally, or no burden at all, because that the role that like you said, if we find the subject matter experts that can do this, then the burden of all that effort, which is actually quite heavy, is lifted to a partner that could be truly dedicated to solving that issue for the school. So I 100% agree with you, and we see it day in, day out.
Yeah, and I don't think I'll be honest, I don't think a lot of administrators understand exactly what you just said, how heavy that burden is. And you may have a few tools in your network that are helping with some aspect of that, be it traffic from some obscure little country halfway around the world, or the phishing attempts that we're talking about. But I just don't think a lot of the administrators outside the tech world really understand how heavy that burden can be.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more. About detection and response for cybersecurity. Why is it still so difficult for schools to detect threats early, right? If they were on their own, for example. Can you elaborate? I want our audience to understand what the challenges are from somebody who's been doing this. You've been working with FBI. You work with several schools. You're the expert in the field helping schools. So why is it difficult for schools to detect threats early?
It is. I can't begin to tell you how far, and I'm opening a door here, but I can't begin to tell you how far behind in the world of IT a lot of schools really are. Schools were very late to the IT game, to actually to accepting and bringing in network connectivity and devices. When I landed at my first school in 2003, coming out of the corporate world, you know, everything I was doing in the corporate world was on a screen, was on a computer. And when I landed at my first school, I was shocked to see how far behind the school really was in terms of digital infrastructure and digital tools. And again, that's a big part of the Modern Learning Collaborative. We have to be able to prepare students, as I said earlier, for the realities of and success in the modern world. And if we're not using those digital tools in schools, we are not doing our jobs. And but I think we're still in the middle of a lot of that. I think there's still a lot of administrators who don't just don't understand that environment and really don't understand, as we said earlier, that the burden that is, and they don't subscribe to the appropriate tools. They don't subscribe to actually just the idea that cybersecurity is a big deal. We're just a school. We don't have any important information. There's nothing anybody wants to get out of our data. Well, that's just wrong-headed thinking. And as you know, we mentioned AI, as that begins to really be deployed in these attack environments, it just makes even the slightest bit of data that can be retrieved that much more valuable, because you're kind of feeding a larger machine. So I really think it's the fact that a lot of administrators just haven't really caught up. And the other thing is, I think they also think, and we've seen this in public schools all around the country, they're actually banning technology. They're banning students bringing phones into their environments, and they think that's enough. You know, they're doing it for other reasons, but they also, from a cyber perspective, think, well, if we just don't have these devices, well, we should be better off. Not necessarily true. And so I think, you know, there's a couple of reasons right there that I think schools are a little slow to pick up on these things.
Yeah, you mentioned about, you know, not allowing BYOD or cell phones into the environment, but it's not just about that, because you still have Chromebooks, you still have Windows machines, workstations, even Linux systems in the environment, and they're all connected to the network. So we found that it's often about connecting behavior across all the systems, not just reacting to alerts in isolation. Meaning that if you have one machine acting abnormal, we really have to look at what's happening in the environment and not that isolated device, which means that it's about visibility. It's not just about the technology deployed on one device, which is kind of what you're referring to. It's not bringing cell phone into the environment doesn't solve the issue of visibility and seeing what's going on across the environment and be able to actually do something about it in real time and avoid a compromise.
Absolutely, 100%. Yep.
Yeah. In fact, you also mentioned that schools say, well, it's not going to happen to me. I don't have any valuable information that the hackers want. And there is a website that shows, the schools that have been attacked across the nation. And it is dotted, literally the map of the US is dotted. And that's actually available public information. The attacks are real, and it's all the time, and it's everywhere. Doesn't matter what size school, even if you're a small school, all the way to the largest districts, it's all the same thing.
It is, and with ransomware attacks, for example, we're not even talking about someone wanting to steal data. They're just getting access to it and making schools pay big bucks to get the information back. So it's not, in that scenario, it's not necessarily about the data they're stealing. It's about them trying to make money, locking everybody out of their data. So, yeah, there's a lot more to the cyber threat than most administrators understand.
Yeah, and in fact, there is very much publicized, publicly available information of $10 million plus to get back some schools after a ransomware attack. So it is a big issue.
It is.
So, which kind of brings up the question about leadership and strategy. For school leaders, superintendents, the boards, how should they be thinking about cybersecurity today?
I think they certainly need to be educated. I think they certainly need to understand, maybe not necessarily the intricacies of how to protect against it, but need to understand and accept that their schools are, as we said at the very top, very attractive targets to cyber threats and cyber incidents and cyber criminals. That's kind of how the Bureau refers to some of those guys, as they're cyber criminals. And it's hard to sort of delineate, if you will, what threat is to the students, and what is the threat to the faculty, and what is the threat to the institution at large. And I think all of those areas should be addressed. They're sextortion, extortion, those things are real, and I've had to fight those in schools, that people are being threatened with, and whether it's real or not, they're still being threatened with the extortion aspect, and that is also something that we and the Bureau is seeing on the rise, is those extortion opportunities, and they're hitting the students as well. And so, as a director of technology, if I'm providing a student a device, which is a doorway into those kinds of criminal activities, I got to make sure that that we're well prepared for that. So I think leadership needs to recognize that the threat landscape is very, very large, and it is important to protect not only the institution, but the faculty, staff, and the students, and to lean on those subject matter experts rather than trying to build that firsthand in their own environment. I think that's the way of the future.
So, having said that, if we were talking to a superintendent or a board, and if they said, well, what's the top 5 tools that I have to deploy with my limited budget to get the most bang for the buck, what are those things that I should be deploying? What are your thoughts on that? What's your recommendation?
So many thoughts. Certainly, tools to recognize when phishing emails arrive, and there are obviously tools to help detect that. I think that's a huge one, again, that we're seeing on the rise more and more. Tools to analyze those emails in other ways as well, to stop the extortion opportunities that are being sent to folks. I think traffic management and understanding the flow of IP traffic, and where it's coming from, where it's going to, where it's going back to, being able to detect that on the front end of the circuit as it's coming into the school, and then being able to understand the traffic within your network infrastructure. So I think those are some of the big keys that I would look at.
So, in a nutshell, phishing awareness and training, email security, network monitoring, and I think on top of that, I would say a very solid backup and disaster recovery, so that if anything happens, you can rely on something to restore from. And for highly critical systems, we could have a disaster recovery plan. I think that those are some of the things that align with what you're saying, and we're seeing it consistently across a lot of school systems. So that's exactly what we recommend as well.
Yeah, the disaster recovery plan is huge, and a lot of schools look at the physical recovery of classroom space and classroom tools, chairs, um, and whiteboards and things like that. But the digital layer is every day even more and more critical to be a big part of that disaster recovery plan. Yep.
Well, Darryl, this has been a great discussion. Before we wrap up, I'd love to ask you one final question. If a school listening to this podcast today and wanted to take one particular step, just one, in the next 30 days to improve their cybersecurity posture, what would you recommend?
Let's see. I think I would first of all, I think recommend any sort of consolidation of all of the tools that they may currently have deployed to help with this effort. Just all the managing, all the monitoring. If you can reduce the number of interfaces that you have to deal with on a daily, hourly basis, that'd be one thing. And if you can offload that to folks that have that subject matter expertise, that would be the way to go, and move towards that. And along the way, then you get the other things we've talked about. You get that email monitoring and management. You get a lot of those things taken off of your plate as well, if you can do that.
So, Security Operations Center partnership, a real partnership that protects the schools.
I think absolutely.
Well, Darryl, thank you very much. I really appreciate your insight. I'm sure our audience is enjoying this conversation as well. And we'll come back to you at some time in the future and get your additional feedback over the next 6 months, what has happened, and continue down this path and this conversation. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Bye-bye.